What what do you remember about your parents, your mom and dad?
Well, like I say, my mother was born over on the Ware farm, and my dad started farming there at 30 when he was 38 years old.
Mm-hmm.
One of the statements he made that helped him decide whether to go farming or not was that he said at the time, he said, if I work half as hard for myself as I do for somebody else, I couldn't miss. And there was a long time before I really understood what he was talking about, because I knew that he wasn't going to just work a half a day. And I believe what he meant was that when you're working for somebody else, you might say you're working half of the day to pay his expense, insurance, all the expenses he has. And so, if that time was going to be going to him, that's when he said he couldn't miss.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how he decided to go farming, even though he didn't know anything about farming. And I don't know. I think he did quite well.
Mm-hmm.
He helped start the Mississippi Valley Dairymen's Association,
Mm-hmm.
because farmers weren't getting a fair price for their milk, for one thing, and the dairies had too much to say as to what the farmers were getting for their milk, and so he helped start that. They went. Him and another fellow went farm to farm talking to
Mm-hmm.
farmers, and of course he would come across farmers that didn't want to be organized, but anyway, it did get formed, and it was helpful. There were farmers up in Wisconsin that didn't have that association, and there came a time when farmers were waiting for a milk truck to come along, and they'd stop it and dump the whole truck over.
Mm.
They were dumping the milk.
Mm.
My mother worked on the farm, doing a lot of things that we all did. I mean,
Yeah.
my mother would get up in the morning and go get the cows in the morning.
What time would that be, roughly?
That would be like 5:30.
Mm-hmm.
And this farm on Harts Mill Road, I wouldn't doubt that she must have got up earlier than that, because we would try to start milking by 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And this pasture was almost a mile back to the
Wow.
back of the farm where the cows were.
Wow, that's a long walk.
And
In
she'd
the
walk
winter,
back
too.
there and get the cows and bring them up. She didn't do that all the time, but she did that every once in a while. She did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember one time we had a bull that was running with the cows, and I remember once he was bringing the cows up to the buildings, and that bull, he decided he's just going to stand sideways across the
Path or gate.
the lane, the lane that we drove the cows. And he wouldn't let any cows go by. Of course, my dad, he finally weaved his way through the cows and got up to that bull, and we had a bumper on the front of the grills, and he bumped that bull in the rear end, and the bull took off up the lane, and he kept right on following it. When the bull started slowing down, like boom, and the bull. He did that 2 or 3 times, and then he finally quit. He probably would have killed that bull if it would have went any further. But I remember one other time, people from the city. We were only about a mile out of the city limits, and there would be guys come out and ask if they could hunt on our property. This one particular time, there was a couple of guys that came out, and Dad said, "Yeah, you can go back and hunt." But it was getting on, this one particular day, it was getting to be 4 o'clock, and my dad said, "I wonder what in the world they're doing back there." And so we didn't get on the tractor, we just walked up the hill, and we got to the top of the hill, and we could see down to where there's a low area.
Yeah.
They had their pickup truck parked there, and the bull was bellowing and pawing up dirt and dust, and these 2 guys were standing up on top of the cab of the truck.
That's hilarious.
And
Oh my goodness.
I don't know exactly, I don't know whether my dad went and got the tractor or what, but that was quite a sight. Anyway, that was a hard farm to farm because it was hills, and the lane had a steep hill to come down when you bring a load of corn or a load of hay, and you had the Ford tractor. It was, you might say, it was smaller than what the load of hay was, and you'd start out real slow, and by the time you were, say, halfway down the hill, well, you'd be shifting into high gear because you didn't want to hold it back too much, or it might jackknife on you. I can remember one time I was plowing corn, and then there again, I could have been, maybe I was in 8th grade. 2-row corn plow on a Ford tractor, and the plow's on the back of the tractor, and a friend of mine next door, he had come over to the fence that bordered the 2 farms, and he was smoking a big long cigar. And he came over the fence and he was puffing on it, and he says, "Here, do you want to take a couple of puffs on it?" So I did, and when I got back on the Ford, the Ford tractor, started plowing again, I think I was seeing things.
Yep.
Because I was. My dad probably wondered what in the world happened here, where we got more corn plowed out than. I can remember once. Now this, my dad passed away in '62. No, in '82.
82.
82. No. 64.
Okay.
And my mother remarried a fella, his name was Henry Posky. He was German, he came from Hamburg. Machinist, he had jumped ship, came to America when there was a tanker docked it on the shore of the United States. And he had some relation that were living in Iowa, and that's how he got from the ship to Iowa. He had never. This was when they still were farming with horses.
Wow.
And this farmer he went to work for, why, he asked this guy if he knew how to drive horses. Oh yeah, I've driven horses. Well then, he hooked the horses up to a drag, and a drag is about, in 4 sections, it's 25 feet wide. Well, he started off with this team of horses in a field, and when he got to the end, he didn't leave enough room for the outside sections to come around, and the outside sections took up part of the fence when he went around. And the farmer came to him and said, "Now what in the world happened here? What you took out this fence?" Oh, he says, "A rabbit jumped up and scared the horses." I always thought that was pretty comical. But anyway, that was after my dad had passed away. But going back to my own father, we were milking about 20 cows, and we had probably at least 20 young stock, like calves or younger milk cows. They weren't really milk cows yet, but they were gonna turn out to be milk cows. We always had to sell 1 or 2 cows a year that weren't producing good. And when I graduated from high school, I thought I was going to farm, and so I farmed with my dad.
Sorry. Fix that. Okay.
I farmed with my dad 4 years, from '56 until 1960. And in the meantime, Dad started building up the herd, and we had like 40 milk cows.
Wow.
And we also were buying a lot of hay from one particular farmer in order to have enough hay for that 40 cows. I remember we had a field it was an 80-acre field, and it was about a mile long. And it was a field that we baled it. There were we got 11,000 bales from it. Or I mean totally from the field, but my dad baled the field to get half of it. So we got like, well, half of that 11,000. And during that time too, wherever my dad did a lot of custom baling, so wherever the baler went, I went. I loaded all the bales. We would load like 1,800 bales in an afternoon. And we'd put 4 layers high and 2 layers wide on a hay rack, so there was about 48 bales on each load. And
how would you load the hay bales? Like, explain that whole process.
yeah, the bales weighed, if the hay was dried and not what it should be, the bales probably weighed about 50 to 65 pounds. And the bales were about I'm going to say 30 inches wide and about 4 foot long and about 20 inches tall. And so you'd start, of course, at the back of the hay rack with two in the very back, end to end, and then you would put another two bales on top of those, and you'd go up, say, like 3 layers, and then you'd start another layer in front of them, but eventually you would have the hay rack 4 layers high, and then you would put one row right down the center just to hold the two rows together so they wouldn't tip off. Normally the fields were fairly smooth, but sometimes you get in hay field where there's a lot of groundhogs that would make piles of dirt here and there, and then it was hay rack was tipping around. And
did it ever tip over?
There were times when a bunch of them would fall off the side of the hay rack.
Not very often.
That wasn't very good.
Yeah.
I can remember one time as being in a field with all them groundhog mounds, and all of a sudden I saw a groundhog running parallel with us, and it was about I'm going to say 25 yards away, and I jumped off the hay rack. I ran up to the tractor, and we had a crank on the fender of the. I grabbed that crank, and I came back, and I just threw that crank, and it was going just like it was a boomerang, and bam! It hit it right smack in the side of the head and killed it dead.
Yeah.
My dad, he couldn't believe it, but the farm also was, like I said, was located closer, about a mile away from the river, a mile and a half. And we also did a lot of boating in the summertime, where baling straw particularly. We'd be all hot and sweaty, and Dad had a boat docked, and we'd go down and get in the boat and go up the river and go swimming, and thought that was really something. Today, after living up north in those nice clear lakes, I think to myself, in the Mississippi, you couldn't see your hand below the surface, only about 6 inches. You couldn't even see it then, let alone look down 5, 6, 7 feet.
Yeah.
The lakes up north. Yeah, well, then 1960, I decided I felt the Lord was calling me in a full-time ministry. So I told my dad about it, and he didn't really say anything. But in the fall, I left and came into Chicago to Trinity College when it was still down in Berthold and Paulina, where Irving Park and Ashland.
Is that because you grew up in the E-Free
Yeah,
church?
yes,
And Trinity's the E-Free
Yeah.
seminary. So.
yeah. And I went there a year, but I wasn't that great of a student in high school, and I came to Trinity on. They were pretty much, back then, it was the cream of the crop that they would accept. They were small. Well, I was nowhere near cream of the crop. And I think too, maybe it was more of an adjustment than I realized. I don't know, because coming off the farm, 4 years after high school, living, doing farm work, and you get pretty relaxed with your mind and everything else, because anyway, I wasn't able to come back unless I raised my grade average. Then I decided, well, I'll go in the Navy and I'll learn machine work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had already gone to um, Des Moines, Iowa, and to have my physical, and I'd taken my physical and passed that all right. As I thought I was all signed up to go.
Mm-hmm.
When I came back to Clinton, I was to get on a train in the Quad Cities, Davenport, Rock Island, Moline area at midnight and be heading to San Diego.
Hmm.
Well, 11 o'clock came that I would have to get going
Yeah.
to meet the train, and my dad came in the living room. I was laying on the Davenport, and he says, it's 11 o'clock, are you gonna go? And I said, I decided I'm not going.
Huh.
And however that was, I must not have signed any final papers, because the next morning, the Navy recruiter called me and said to me, how it's come you weren't on the train? And I said, I decided I didn't want to go.
Huh.
Nothing more was said.
That was it. Yeah.
Well, then it turned out my dad found a machining center that I could start in to learn the trade.
Mm-hmm.
And how he financed it is when you started making something to sell, you would sell the parts, and that would pay your tuition or expense.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 8 years.
Hmm.
And then a fellow came to me that actually he was a member in our church. He told me about a place up in Fulton, right across the river from Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
that was hiring young fellows in their tool room.
Mm-hmm.
So I went there, and I worked there for 14 years, and that's where I really got more training as a tool maker, because I was working with guys that had been working at the trade for 35 or more years. And so I worked there 14 years, and then I moved to another company that was in Iowa, and worked there a couple of years. But then I found out we had come up here to Woodruff, Minocqua area where Karen's folks lived, and that particular year was 1979, and there was a machine shop had opened up, and I stopped and looked at it on our way back from being at her folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked what I saw. It was a machine shop in the basement, right in town in Minocqua.
Hmm.
Real clean floors, clean machines, good heat in the building.
Yeah.
And that was where how I actually managed to move up to Woodruff. That was 1980.
Yeah. How long so you worked at that machine shop?
And then I worked at that shop for 5 years, and then the owner, Don Evans was his name. He had started a plant in just north of Madison, Wisconsin. And he wanted to have a shop up there, so he started this shop in '79, and then he decided in 1985 to discontinue the shop and move it either to Oshkosh or down to Calhoun, Georgia. And he told us we could go to either one of them places. Well, none of us wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But as it was, I had met Art Stoll that I had met a couple of years earlier. And he had told me that he had himself would like to have a machine shop up north.
Mm-hmm.
He had a home up in Flambeau on Moss Lake was the name of the lake he was on. And so I called him right away and told him that this Don Evans is moving out, and so he in turn, he made a decision that to move his equipment in the afternoon, and Don Evans moved out in the morning, so he never lost any work at all.
Yeah. So you stayed in the same building?
Stayed right there in that same building. And Art Stoll wanted to put up his own building right in Monaco area.
Yeah.
And us guys were really hoping that that would happen, but as it ended up, Monaco wanted too much for property. Rhinelander says, come on down here, we'll give you a piece of ground.
Yeah.
So that's what he did. He put a building up in Rhinelander, and so then I worked for him for almost 20 years down there.
Wow.
And there were 3 of us that were taking turns driving down there, but then it ended up that 2 of us ended up trading off every other week driving. And
Is that
he
what
was building plastic ejection molds.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I switched from building dies to building ejection molds. And he was had business with Gillette Razor and Western Electric to build stuff for the telephones and IBM, American Can, a lot of big companies that he was building molds for.
Yeah. So is that where you finished?
That's where I
retired?
finished.
Wow.
And of course, when the Chinese started really undercutting, what the Chinese were doing, Gillette would send a print over to them to build the mold. Then they would build the mold for Gillette, but then they also would build a mold for themselves. But they could build a mold for half of what it cost us because they're real cheap labor. And so pretty soon my art couldn't afford to have this shop up in Rhinelander, and he moved it back down to Rhinelander in 2003, and I helped him move some of his equipment back down. But then after that, I started just doing all around work.
Yeah.
And I called myself Don's A&W, but I said I don't serve any root beer.
That's good.
I did that from 2003 until, I don't know, let's see, it's 17. I did that till about 2015, and then I decided just gradually tell different ones I wasn't going to do anymore.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I do now is, for Art Stoll, is I just clear his driveway in the wintertime. And this past winter, I only blew his driveway out once.
Yeah.
So it didn't amount to anything. But
yeah. Why don't we stop right there?